Light Pollution News, May 2026. Trust nobody, check everything. Today I'm welcoming back statistician Paul Marchant, the founder of darkskysites.com, Barrington Russell, and welcoming back to the show one of my favorite guests, lawyer and from the Plan B team, Yana Yakushina. This episode, New York reps put forth a new light pollution bill. So what's all the fuss about? We'll dive into precisely what that means for New Yorkers. Also, we talk rigorously about rigorousness of crime study methodologies. And lastly, what's 70% larger than the ISS and comes in 1 million quantities? You'll find out next on another Light Pollution News. Welcome to Light Pollution News. I'm your host, Bill McGeaney. This show, if you have not been here before, covers a very wide-ranging topic of light pollution. And light pollution, for you, maybe a newbie who's listening today, it's a surprisingly wide-ranging topic. I did not think that when I first started this show. I thought it would be a very narrow, actually kind of a little more of a boring topic to discuss, but it's pretty all-encompassing. It's pretty amazing. So the Light Pollution News is a listener-supported show, which means that we get all of our funding from you, the listener, and you, listener, help us cover all of our expenses when it comes to all of our hard expenses. So let's say, our server costs or any of our software costs, everything that we need help with over the course of that month to build the show. One thing we don't have is no one on our team is paid, except for Caden, our awesome audio engineer, but that's where we're at right now. So if you like the show, if you like what we're doing, and you would like to see it flourish and continue to grow and continue to have opportunity, why not consider supporting the show? You can find the link in your show notes today. And you can also go over to our website, lightpollutionnews.com, and find the tab that says support the show. Make it very simple for you. All right, let's jump in. This may be a wild one. Let's give it a go. I want to welcome back my mate lineup. These guys are great, aren't they? Very, very glad to have everyone back with us with one additional voice, one voice out, one voice in. You're going to recognize that voice in a little bit, but let me get started with the introductions here. Starting with you, Barrington. You're an astrophotographer. You're a software designer. You made this incredible site that I can't say enough about. You can really tell when someone makes a product, when someone makes something that is trying to fill a void, trying to fix a problem, fix a need that they have, it really bleeds through. And you can tell the passion behind it and the thoughtfulness behind it. You built this site, darkskysites.com, which feels like a light pollution map that's kind of on steroids. It can do a lot of really cool things. Why don't you tell me a little more about where that came from?
As an astronomer, we have a lot of problems. If you're an astrophotographer, you have a lot more problems. A buddy of mine and I, we do astronomy together. So I roped him into this awful, terrible black hole of a hobby, which is taking photographs of the night sky.
Money pit.
It's like being miserable, but for fun. We take very, very long exposures. And so we care a lot about the performance of the sky and how does it compare to home. If I want to go somewhere, well, how much faster is that? And so we planned a trip to Spain a number of years ago to a small little dark sky place called Villa Harta, which is outside of Cordoba. There was no way to really quantify the sky. We couldn't really figure out how much faster is this than home. I mean, yes, you could piece together the math, by looking at light pollution map info, the gold standard for so long. But there was no way to really get good data like, well, how does it compare to this place and that place and that place? So I thought we should probably make a site that can do this. We've got the satellite data. We just need what I thought was a little bit of physics turned into about a year of physics, to do that. When we got there to our amazing dark sky site, there was a huge big light dome on the horizon from Cordoba because, the existing sites couldn't tell you what the horizon looked like. And so dark sky sites in part was built to answer that question, not just what is the value of the sky above you, but what does the horizon look like when you get there? What can I expect from the lit environment for any place on Earth? And so began a year-long, voyage into coding and physics and all sorts of things, and eventually produced the site we have today at darkskysites.com, where you can indeed see what your horizon looks like at any point on Earth, hopefully to solve the problem that my buddy and I had. What do we see when we get there? And if you solve your own problem, hopefully you solve the problem for other people too. And so the idea behind the site is to gift to the astronomy community and anybody else that's observing the sky is, what do you see when you go somewhere? Not just what is the number, but actually visually, what is it that you see in the sky, light pollution-wise?
And even when you solve your own problem, you often solves problems that I didn't know were there. And that's what this site does. I can't say enough about it. It's really interesting. And maybe we'll get to the article. Not, I don't know. There was an article I had that I had to cut from the last episode just due to time. And one of the things you try and do is project out. You try and forecast, which is really interesting. That's a really interesting concept. How is that working, and how's that coming about?
One of the mistakes, right, is to treat light pollution as static. Because we can see that there are lights on the ground, and yes, they emit light in a certain way, and that's all the satellite can see. So we use this instrument called VIIRS, which is on board, a satellite. It looks at what we call the upward radiance. That is the light that is leaving the ground. But that is not light pollution, right? That's just an emitter. So what we need to do is we need to do some clever physics to find out how that light propagates through the atmosphere. The problem is that the atmosphere is quite variable. It varies depending on the time of year, on different human patterns, depending on aerosol load, solar brightening, all sorts of things. So, what we see is that the atmosphere is not static, and so light pollution is not static either. So the site looks at both what we call the annual composite. So that's the average of all the readings over the year. But it also has the capability to get light pollution as often as daily. So we can get the radiance as often as daily if we want. The computational load's quite high, so we don't do it in practice, we do it monthly. So what we can build is we can build this picture of the variability of the light pollution propagation throughout the year. It's quite noisy. It's sort of stochastic in a way. But from that, we can look at different trends. So we can look at the annual trend. And so, it's been well publicized that the world is getting brighter. To some extent, that is true. Certain locations are getting brighter. And France is a really good example of this. France is getting darker. And so we've been able to build charts on the site. So for any location, you can look at the profile of its illumination over time. And you can see that France, for example, is getting darker. So from that, and I'm sure Paul can jump in with his statistical expertise, but it's not too difficult to build certain trends and to analyze and project and extrapolate what a particular region will do in the future based on the past. So because we have this wealth of data, we've become very good at propagating that light into the virtual atmosphere. It's not too much of a stretch, in fact, to then go and extrapolate what we think will happen in the future based on the past trend. So not only can we say, well, this is how it looks last month, but we can take a reasonably good stab at guessing, well, this is what it's going to be like in a month from now and maybe in a year from now.
Yeah, it's really unique and really interesting. You can click on it. You can actually see the movement over time of the measurements. To your point, the article that we excluded from last episode, I'll just go over the stats in it. And it measures in nature. And it said a 16% overall global nighttime brightness increase between 2014 to 2022, whereby you had actual brightness, just on the brightness side, increasing by 34%, but then it was offset by 18% dimming. That's part of the research there. And, you have different reasons for that. It's not just, because you have dark sky preserves. It's also because you have economic impacts that affect people, like say Afghanistan, Venezuela, Ukraine. In France, you have energy policy that affects people. These are all noted in where you can see the spikes, you can see the change, you can see the measurement points in darkskysites.com, which is really cool. Highly recommend you at home, if you're interested in learning more, swing out there. If you're of the skill set, why not just reach out to Barrington? Because I'm sure, Barrington, you're always looking for a hand in this. We can build something amazing here. It's got so much potential. It's such a cool site. I want to swing it over to my second guest this month, bringing back Paul Marchant. I didn't do the French enunciation there. Look at that, Paul. That was pretty good, huh? Paul is a retired astrophysicist, a jack of statistical trades. You have done a lot in your past, and we're going to get into some policy news and some policy details that I think you're really going to be able to help us on and help listener understand what's going on here. If you were listening from last show, I'm going to kind of move on a little down to our third guest, because I know Paul has extensively been able to explain himself in the last episode. If that sounds good, Paul, you have anything you want to say before I do that?
Well, no, I'm a chartered statistician of the Royal Statistical Society. That's my clout in the statistical world. Doesn't mean to say I don't make mistakes, or I certainly don't know that much, I feel. I know less now. I'm an old man rather than I did when I was a young man, but there we are.
Well, that's a good sign, right? That's a good sign, though. Not because you're losing your mind, just,
No. Just...
And then our final guest here today, I want to welcome back someone I'm always glad to personally have on the show. stepping in on short notice. Want to welcome back Yana Yakushina, once again, the lawyer and researcher and the deputy executive director of the Space Corps Foundation, Inc., co-founder of Living Night, deeply involved with Plan B. That's a project. It's not a pill. And oh, sorry, Yana, every time I see that, I just think it's a pill. It's a project, guys, just so you at home are confused. And you can always find Yana on LinkedIn. She told me before we recorded here, if you're not following her on LinkedIn, you should be. And I want to welcome Yana back to Light Pollution News. Yana, how have you been?
Hi, and nice to be back, first of all. And the Plan B, yes, I heard a lot from our American colleagues in France that the naming is very bad. But when we're choosing the name of the project, it's a Horizon Europe project, and we had like 25, 30 people voting. My voice wasn't heard there. So this is the name of the project for the last 2 years. But yeah, I've been good overall, except the name of the project.
Well, you guys, now you've been doing a lot. You've been traveling a lot. You've been doing a lot of work. One of the things I saw on LinkedIn is that you worked on this Restoring the Night for Nature and Beyond at the Convention on Migratory Species. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this and what happened there and what went on?
So within Plan B project, weird enough, yeah, we created the policy brief to restore and protect the night. So it's kind of a broader action to not just reduce light pollution, but like we broadened the concepts, and I wrote a lot of paper about it, that we have to talk about the night rather than just light pollution, because it has a lot of conflicts. And with this policy brief, we've been working with a lot of national governments, and we also started to work with the international agenda. The Convention on Migratory Species has been working on light pollution for last couple of years. I think they started in 2020, somewhere there, and they have a series of international light pollution guidelines, which are of course non-binding, but I mean, it's an international convention which indicates that light pollution has impacts on migratory species. And this time there was a conference of the parties. They do it, I think, every 3 years or 2 years. I can be wrong, but I think it's 2-3 years, something like that. When all the parties, so all the countries which signed that convention, they meet somewhere and discuss emerging issues. The interesting thing was this time in Brazil, I was lucky to be there. It's crazy event, very important, I think, which politically important and also very crazy because it's a lot of people, a lot of stuff going on. But one of the agenda items was specifically dedicated to light pollution. So it was nice to hear what other countries are thinking about the issue. What is their perspective, whether there was any opposition. Spoiler, there were no opposition. There were just rather some comments on how to formulate the document more correctly to facilitate further work, which is good news for us here, I think. And I also was lucky to have an official side event. So when the conference of the party of any convention occurs, you have the main zone, which is blue zone, the political zone, where all the government people are. And then you also have green zone, is the events which are more like for broader stakeholders. So we had a side event within the blue zone. So we had an opportunity to engage with the government people and observers. And we hosted a official side event on the restoring of the night, where I had representatives from conventional migratory species themselves and also IUCN, which is an organization working on protection of species. So it's pretty big news. It's nice to see that light pollution started to get more attention at the higher level agenda. It's a very minimum and non-binding now, but we hope we can grow it further because there is an interest between different countries. So yeah, that's the news. I hope we can build up a similar event. In October, there's going to be a conventional biological diversity conference of the parties, which will be held in Armenia, and we hope to do similar event there. And the conventional biological diversity is a bit even bigger than the migratory species. So let's pray together that we can make it work.
When is that again?
It's October, mid-October. I don't remember specifically. I have to have a look, but I think, yeah, somewhere it's 1 week, somewhere in October, mid-October.
Okay.
The first or the third week.
I guess, can you put this in context, this event? I know it's non-binding and it doesn't have teeth, and it's really just more of a, I guess, a notice, right? Compared to, say, like 5-10 years ago, how much has this progressed?
It depends on what level we're talking about, but previous speakers just spoke about France a lot. But France has binding laws to reduce light pollution. So it's nice to see that they're getting darker because the laws are working. So in some countries, you literally have very binding regulations in place. And the international agenda, I would say that more and more attention is like getting light pollution getting noticed, and more countries agrees that the action is needed. I would put it that way. And in comparison with 5 years ago, it's way bigger, but it's still not enough to kind of facilitate that all the governments will adopt the law tomorrow. We're kind of in transition of building up. I will not underestimate our efforts, so I will say that it's growing. The attention is growing.
Good. All right. Let's start today's show. And I had to share this one with you guys because it involves the new presidential library for my glorious, since I'm the only American now back on the show this week, my glorious leader, savior of mankind, the true heir to St. Peter, and without a doubt, the most deserving man of the Nobel Peace Prize, the immortal healer of man, as Donald J. Trump. I don't know if you guys have seen, he has plans, his team, including, I think it was from his sons, disclosed new plans for the presidential library. That's contingent, of course, on him actually stepping down from office after his 2 terms are up. The building will be filled with every gaudy and grand show of opulence that you'd pretty much expect from the Trump brand, including space to include whole jets and planes. For our purposes, though, the impact on the Miami skyline will be quite noticeable. From the bottom to the top, the 2 sides appear to have a bright lighting, kind of akin to a glow stick. If you ever seen, the easiest way for me to explain it is if you look up Comcast Technology Tower of Philadelphia, and you'll see it looks like a vape. So they have 2 of these glow sticks going all the way up this, or I think it's 3 going up the sides of the building. And if that's not enough, the building will have a tall spire jutting out from the top with programmable, well, I presume it's going to be programmable lights, because what isn't programmable these days? So you guys excited about this? This is one of the lasting legacies of the greatest Americans among us.
Just you talking about it makes me want to feel sick. It's vulgar.
Well, that's
well, I think I'll keep my mouth closed in case I ever want a visa.
Yeah, you guys might not be able to get in if you say anything here. So, you know, I didn't mean to put you guys in the
can be unnecessary. Can be unnecessary. Let's put it that way, you know.
The presidential libraries are a little bit extravagant, but I mean, this one takes the cake and probably will for, well, assuming he steps down, for future presidents. We'll see what goes on there. Shifting over, there's a interesting study out of behavioral ecology and sociology that I think kind of sets the trend for what we're going to be talking about for a little bit. A team looked at how primates, the black capuchin monkeys' sleeping behavior changed with the degree of light from the moon. The data to date indicates that a fear of predation drove the monkey's sleeping selection in the trees, whereby they looked at 384 records of the sleeping locations, and they found that monkeys tended to sleep higher in the trees on new moon nights and lower on full moon nights, with a perceived elevation and predation risk, so they go up higher for perceived safety. I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think these monkeys simply want to observe the Milky Way before bed. That's me.
Nice of you.
That's my interpretation on that.
But after the event, is it possible? It's possible to, you know, come up with loads of theories why it might be. You know, that, I mean, like humans, we're a daytime species. We just feel, you know, the day is our place, and the night makes us feel uneasy. And, you know, presumably nocturnal species are the other way round. They kind of a bit nervy when they encounter daytime. But maybe they what they say about predation. Maybe they are more scared when they can't see as well, and you know, just to be on the safe side, climb higher. Or maybe, I don't know. But it doesn't surprise me entirely. But then I don't really have the mindset of these creatures. So there we are.
Well, this study makes a good segue into one of our bigger stories for this month. And that was New York state law designed to bring responsible lighting policies to the Empire State. The facts on the ground are this. New York Assemblywoman Deborah Glick of Manhattan introduced A 4615, and State Senator Brad Holyman Siegel, also representing Manhattan, introduced a corresponding Senate bill, S 5007. Well, by and large, the New York bill is not as sturdy and durable as other ones that we've seen on the show. Details of the New York bill are as follows. All exterior lighting fixtures in the state are required to be shielded after January 1st, 2028, with a host of exceptions that we'll talk about in a bit. If they're not shielded or motion sensing, then they will need to be turned off between 11 p.m. and sunrise. No amphitheater, arena, recreational facility will be allowed to be illuminated after 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. This includes both public and privately owned facilities. Law won't override local light pollution ordinances provided that they match or supersede the contents of this bill. As I can tell, this bill has no enforcement mechanisms. I may be wrong about, but there's numerous versions online, but I did not actually find any enforcement mechanisms on the one that I believe to be the final bill that's in committee at the moment. I guess the response to this idea of this bill has been as predictable, I guess is the best way to say it. We're seeing a ramp up of these scare tactics. You saw a little bit with Palo Alto, you saw it little bit with Maine, and here, you would expect to see, going to New York, to one of the biggest media markets on the planet, it wouldn't be a shock to see a big ramp up that includes these great New York Post headlines. No bright idea. Lawmaker wants to force New York City go dark after 11 p.m. and critics say it's a criminal's dream bill. And then the other one here. New York City's iconic landmarks will go completely dark after 11 p.m. thanks to completely insane bill. But there's also less sensational news that provided some balanced coverage, including pro and con breakdown from CBS News. At the root, there appears to be three major points of contention. First, the government overreach. Obviously, that's always the thing. I think, Paul, you hinted on that, some of that in the last episode. So this idea of personal freedoms, I got a right to do whatever the hell I want. You have the perception that everyone is going to be raped, robbed, murdered immediately once that light goes out, which, of course, the light wouldn't go out if you had shielding, but far be it from anyone to actually read the contents of the bill. And then blatant hypocrisy over the actual goal of the bill, given the exemptions, which, of course, as you'd expect, there are a few. So let's jump in. Sports and recreational facilities that are being used for events prior to 11 p.m. can continue with their lighting as the event needs. Advertisement signs of all types are excluded. FAA required lighting for airfields and navigation obviously is excluded from that. Exemptions for worker safety, be it industrial, manufacturing, agricultural, mining, you name it. Emergency lighting for first responders, lighting as required by federal law. Tunnel and roadway underpass lighting, which, okay, that's fine normally. Lighting for municipal street services and road maintenance. Building construction lighting, any street light that can't obtain shielding from a manufacturer, any incandescent fixture of or less than 150 watts and or holiday lighting, lighting of any cultural or historic facility, and most hypocritically, a straight up exemption for Times Square, whose ads I have read while flying over New York City. Personally read that from a plane, which, that's a long list of exemptions. Also note that the Department of Environmental Conservation may exempt lights when there's no marketable shielding available. So criticism of this bill came far and wide with a statement I think most of you would understand per these quotes. Per Staten Island resident Al Lebrio in the CBS News piece, we're never going to see the stars I can see when I go upstate camping. We're never going to have that. So why even bother? And then there's another resident in Brooklyn. Anything could happen, even with the lights on. We're scared. Imagine no light. We cannot live like this here. So this is a very different take from other pieces of policy we've seen. It's not pinning anything to the Illuminated Engineering Society standards, which here in the U.S., essentially the standards that we would use for measurement. It's a bill that is honestly just asking people to shield lights. I've been asking people that for a long time. I don't see why it's so bad, but we'll note that the bill may probably or may not ever see the light of day on the floor. Is such backlash a failure of education, or is it something more insidious?
I would love to start. I think the starting point here that New York already had some light pollution considerations in their lighting ordinance from before. So this kind of an expansion of what they had before. So the previous provisions, they required to turn off the public lighting, which is also very limited for New York, because I think 90% of light is like privately owned. To turn off the lights, I think during the nighttime hours, like from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., during migration periods. So they turn off the light to protect the migratory. I think it was mainly migratory birds I don't know, probably a lot of people saw that statistics, how many birds just crash into this high illuminated building. So this was their first step. Actually glad to see that they're trying to like push it further. I think they're kind of trying to do it step by step. And another problem here is the lack of education. I genuinely think so, because all these news titles which you were talking about, that we're gonna get dark and everybody gets scared when it's just requests for shielding, I think they have to show good examples of lighting and how it can look like. And it's not about the light still will be there. And in some cases, as we all know, like Paul know better than anybody else, that you can actually feel way safer than the light is dimmed because there's no contrast. But yeah, what should we do is the question to help New York to actually introduce this bill.
How do you convey that to an individual who's, if you're one of the writers of this bill, you want to get it passed, or you're one of the groups. We saw in Palo Alto, a lot of it was pushed by bird groups. Bird groups worked with the community, worked trying to educate people. They worked a lot of education out there. How do you do that in a place like, now this isn't just for New York City. I want to add the bill that you spoke about, Yana, is a New York City specific. The prior light pollution legislation is New York City specific with the lights out. This will be for the whole state of New York. How do you bridge that over a huge variety of people? It's not just talking about urban, you're talking about rural, you're talking about people who are very different from the other part of the state. I don't have an answer in that one.
I mean, I suppose one point to make would be you have to have some limit somewhere, and there are consequences of overlighting. You know, even the people who want it, there was a quote there about seeing the stars up in upstate New York. They might not, you know, if it just carries on, you won't even be able to see the stars in upstate New York that you can now, because the pollution will spread. So it has to be, you know, have to have an eye to reduction of pollutants. So
I was just wondering, you know, how many laws are being passed without people's awareness? Like, I think it's just the problem of lighting, because people like it so much that you have to discuss that, do we need a law to prohibit it or not with like every single individual? But like when they ban vaping or whatever, like nobody asks you about it. Like that's also kind of, it's the very essential, and it's kind of a very philosophical thinking about light. And this is why it's super difficult to adopt the laws, regulations, or even do anything about it, because for everyone, lighting is something super desirable. Like, I don't have an answer, but I think that's kind of a core problem in there, you know?
We're a daytime species, so we you know, what's wrong with light?
But no one's, here's the thing, like if you have shielding, no one's turning off the light.
You tell them, you know, well, they don't understand this. That's the whole problem.
Well, maybe one of the pieces there is there's no way to fund the shielding. You know, a voucher program or something where someone can apply for that shielding might be a way to help ease people into this, because otherwise it's on their own dime to manage that shielding piece. Of course, there's no teeth in here either. I just look at some of this stuff and it's easy pickings for tabloid type sensationalism, because they know they can play off of this. And even they wholesalely misrepresent it, because there's nothing in there that's true on these articles when you see them. They wholesalely misrepresent it, and then they play on people's fears, and then now they have an instant backlash against something it's not a perfect bill. It needs some tweaks, it needs some work. You know, it needs to find a way to economically afford people the ability to do what it asks. But besides that, it's not a very restrictive bill.
I was also thinking maybe, and this is what's not discussed very widely, especially when we talk about light protection, light pollution mitigation or nighttime preservation, is what are the incentives? Like, so if I would change, like everybody talking about the enforcement through sanctions or control or any other mechanism, but what you can gain if I will introduce like shielding or whatever, like 5 responsible outdoor lighting principles. It can be a very long discussion. I'm just dropping it in there.
I think that's a great way. When other areas have tried to do this, they've had educational outreach. I don't know. Could be better. Well, I want to move us on to some further discussion points here. In an article I came across from Vox, I held on to this one for a month because I knew, Paul, you're going to be coming on, and I knew we would be able to talk about some of this stuff here. It cites property crime estimates from the UN showing a linear decline. This is U.S. based from 1979 to 2024, with a small bump during COVID. It estimates that burglary rates have plummeted by 80% since 1990, while crediting those four heroes, the stronger locks, household security systems, doorbell cameras, and of course, outdoor lighting as being the pinnacles of why this crime is not occurring anymore. Of course, the article doesn't make connections between any of them. It just cites that their usage as a correlative activity, their increased uses as a correlative activity to why this stuff, while we're seeing a reduction in these types of crimes. It didn't make any causal inference as to why property crime dropped 9% in, say, like 2023, 2024, which is an abnormally high percentage. It also didn't explain why vehicular theft jumped in during COVID when we were all at home with neighborhood surveillance and plenty of outdoor lighting. This is an interesting piece, of course. It's in the show notes. Full disclosure, this is kind of a late ad, so I may have got some things wrong here. I don't think I did. I think I captured the overall gist. This is a good way to lean into. Paul, you had your strengths of leads, lighting, and crime study and its advantages over those done by others. You assessed the methodology that went on in the leads study. So why don't you walk us through that? Why don't you walk us through, what happened in that one?
Okay, just before I go into that, I mean, I think there's a reference in this paper about the lead study from me, Paul Marchant, and Paul Norman, who wrote it. It came out last summer. The fact that, this crime is decaying everywhere. I mean, I haven't got it to hand, but Farrell, who works at a local university, I think it's an article of his anyway. But in the lead study, I mean, basically, back in the early 2000s, the Leeds put in for changing its orange low pressure lights to white lights. They weren't LEDs then, but they were pretty white. And it did so over the space of about, many years. I mean, the study series is nearly 9 years, during which time 78,000 lights were changed, basically. There's a unit of kind of geography called the mid-level super output area, MSOA, but Leeds is divided up into 107 of these. So basically you've got 107 different time series going along of crime, how the weekly crime, it's done in weeks, is going along, and indeed it is falling. If you look at the supplementary information, which is at the end of the online version of the paper, you will see how it's falling. You'll also see markedly things to do with seasonality, because obviously there's more dark in winter and less dark in summer, so you get a seasonal pattern.
Well, Paul, I want to pause you right there on seasonality. That's an interesting piece just from the data here, at least the previous data here, when I just took it and bucketed it and tried to make sense of it, is that seasonality plays a big role in that when it's warmer, you have a lot more activity, and when it's colder, you have a lot less activity. Yeah. And it seems way more impactful than anything that I've seen in any of these studies, but continue on.
No, we'll just take account of it, though. It's done over weeks, and it's there you can see the plots of the data in the supplementary information. But the thing is, this was done in these 107 different areas. So basically you link them all together, because the other time-dependent thing is the amount of the new white light that's being replaced. So you're basically seeing how this sort of change of crime is being affected by the increasing amounts of lighting in the different areas. And there's also some areas get the lighting early and build up fast. There's all sorts of different ways the lighting's going in the area, so some have to wait a while to get it. So there are different stages. So that gives a handle on how, the difference that the lighting is making. Anyway, it was done. I mean, you can see with your naked eye, say, of these plots in the supplementary information, that you can't detect the proportion of light occurring at night is not really changing. It says that you can't see, but it's also confirmed by this multi-level longitudinal model. Longitudinal means over time, multi-level, because what you have is these 107 areas. Inside of each of those, the 456 weeks of the time series, so the events, like the amounts of crime that's occurring in that time. So that's, you can see it as sort of like a hierarchy. So you've got the high level, which is the area, and then you've got the time points, which is underneath each of the areas to do it. So that's why it's called multi-level. So I did the analysis and with my colleague, and we basically, it shows actually the best sort of estimate. If you look at the night to day ratio, it worked out 2% worse, plus or minus 5%. So whatever there is a chance that it might have been improving things, but it also might have been making things a good bit worse. So that's the result of it.
Well, Paul,
does that satisfy you?
It does. It does. I guess I don't understand why municipalities need to justify their lighting by crime studies. It seems like there's a ton of support out there. I don't ever hear anyone, except for me, saying turn off your light, turn off the street lights. Like, I don't see anyone out there saying they want less street lights. Everyone wants more. So why would a municipality have to justify? Because correct me where I'm wrong in understanding what you're saying, is that it's kind of a negligible change. Whatever happened, it's negligible. Yeah. It's not impactful. And why, if it's negligible, they know that it's going to be negligible. Like, they know going in.
They didn't. There were these other studies saying, well, lighting will really reduce the crime, and you can do sort of cost-benefit analyses and all that kind of stuff. But it's just the previous studies were wrong. I should also say, perhaps to put a bit more context, that in the UK, the National Institute for Health and Care Research put over £400,000, which would be over $500,000, and that was some time ago, 10 years, more than 10 years ago, into studying what was the effect of reducing light. But also the investigators, what would be called an undeclared variation of protocol, i.e. they did something that they didn't say they were going to do. It's all focused on reduced lighting, but they actually see the change to white light. In fact, of all the kind of changes, there were more changes to white light than any of the changes in reducing light. Anyway, but this was done. I mean, the paper is by Steinbach in 2015, and they couldn't find any, none of the results they got was statistically significant at the 5% level. So who's no good?
Who's telling them that it's going to reduce all this? Where are they getting that data when they go into do these conversions that it's going to reduce all this crime? Where did Leeds get this data that they're going to be able to fire the whole police force because they're going to be living in utopia? They'll be able to, there's never going to be a problem again.
Well, if you read the paper, there's quotes from the whatever they call it, the business case that they had to put forward to get the money to do this, to put the lights in. And it was on the basis, and it's still out there, this sort of study, which was a systematic review of lighting and crime. Now, I look at this. Let me just say that systematic reviews are this kind of where you consolidate the evidence. You put the evidence or look at the whole field. If it's sensible, only if it's sensible, you combine studies doing more or less the same thing, and you can do like a weighted average of the results. So you come to an average result of all the results. So that's what a meta-analysis is. And there was this one done, but I just asked the question because I'm,
curious.
What is the evidence for that? And this study came out from this systematic review, sponsored by the UK Government Home Office. I looked at it and it was just absolutely terrible. It was, in terms of its methods. I mean, I can say what it is, or maybe they want to go regression towards the mean, over dispersion. And there's always publication bias. That is, people tend to publish studies which give positive results, upbeat results, that kind of stuff, rather than just, well, it didn't work. Those results don't get published as much.
Running up on some time here, but I want to get this article. This may be my last one I can get in today, but I want to touch on it. Here we had, and I know you wrote something up, you sent it over, and quite frankly, it was difficult for me to follow, so maybe you can help me here. We had a study here that has been influential in justification in many cities, including Atlanta and Detroit, as they go for their new LED streetlights. And I don't really care about the idea of lighting and crime as much as the methodology seemed to be pretty off. And to me, it seemed to be off because of the sample size versus, like it was a very narrow sample size. So real quick, there was a study we had here done by University of Pennsylvania claiming it reduced crime by 15% at night and 21% reduction in nighttime gun violence by essentially daylighting high crime areas rather than looking over a 10 to 20 year period. Since, streetlights, they weren't invented yesterday. They've been around for a very long time. And they looked at just 23 months of data from June 2022 to May 2024. It's oddly enough the same period of time where in the U.S. you had that 9% drop in property crimes across the board. We saw a lot of downward trends during that time for crime. They studied it. In April of 2025, Philadelphia Energy Authority, oddly enough, a organization that probably has to justify its, procurement and plans, was released a presser praising it as 21% reduction in gun violence. It seems like public officials were the street lighting people here were very excited about this study proving that, it prevented crime. It did all these things. So I don't know, I'm not going to argue with if it prevented crime or not. I don't understand why they would.
Well, I might.
Well, it looked like they cherry picked the dates. That's what it looked like.
Well, I don't think it's long enough for whereas my study. I mean, you do need to have the lights changing, otherwise you're not going to know, are you? So, I mean, it's okay to have a bit of a run-in, which they did have, but only less than a year, I would think, was my study. This one in Leeds, which has got nearly 9 years of data, so it's a longer study and nearly over twice the number of lamp changes. So I would have thought it would be more sort of reliable.
Prima facie, right up front, there's always been streetlights, so why would LEDs suddenly cut crime? That's the question that in my mind wasn't answered either. Why?
Well, that is what is claimed because the light is whiter and maybe more visibility. I don't know. But if you change anything, it is worth knowing what has happened. Has it worked? I mean, it amazes me that I don't know in the UK, so there has been on individual studies. I spoke about the National Institute for Health and Care Research thing and the Steinbach paper. And incidentally, on the website, there's a fuller report of what went on in this study using more data than I had access to. You do need to have lamps changing in order to see what they've done. And anything, like if you change, taking off warfarin and put onto a different thing.
I got you.
Because that's national policy. The National Health Services said this is what we're going to do. You'd want to see what it's actually done.
A good researcher would say, hey, when I have if I already have something in place, say I already have streetlights in place, HPS, whatever they are, they're already in place, they're already out there. Switching over to an LED may create a modest adjustment in my numbers. If I saw something that was a size 21%, I would question that off the bat because why would that create? Here's the thing. There's no why would that create it. There's nothing in there saying there's a whole bunch of anecdotal assumptions, but there's no causal variable.
Well, that's saying it is. I don't know. I mean, they would say that they've done this study and it's very good. But I don't. I mean, I have other problems with it because I don't really understand what they've done. Maybe you could get some statisticians to have a closer look at it in the USA because I think it would do it. I mean, even great British medical statistician in the UK, and he would say in one of his enders, trust nobody, check everything. And so you need to do that. Everybody needs to do that, even on the studies you like the results for. Even on the studies you like the results. If you want to be, if you want good studies, it's good science, you check it all.
Well, Paul, thank you for going over some of that stuff. I know that's something I've been curious about for a while, and thank you for walking us through some of that and walking through some of the pitfalls. Yeah. If you have any future data that comes up with these authors, that'll be great to hear. This has been something that, I dumbfounded at a place. The University of Pennsylvania purports to be one of the greatest institutions for education in the U.S., and they put out something that looks like a master's thesis in my head. So, hey, who am I to talk about?
Never mind about the great institutions or the eminent people. It's just whether it's true or not. I mean, presumably at one time Jeffrey Epstein seemed to be a great person. There's loads of them, archbishops, all sorts of things. So check the facts. Always check the facts.
Oh, well, on that note, let's switch over to some equally as, I guess, depressing but more fun to talk about stuff than crime statistics. No offense, Paul. It's a little dry. It's a little dry.
Well, it's important, though.
It is very important. Well, we had this comic come from XKCD. I don't know if any of you guys have seen those comics in the past. They're always good. Barrington, you're a tech guy. You know XKCD. It involves two stick figures standing on the left side, one wearing a hat and one with a ponytail. And on the other side of the strip is a single stick figure standing alone, looking at an image of the stars over the earth with a rectangular box in space. And the figure on the left asks, "Aren't you worried these will be disruptive for ground-based astronomy?" And the one on the right responds, "No, why?" Underneath the comic, it reads, "My new company is being criticized for our satellites that deploy 100-mile wide banners painted with inaccurate pictures of the night sky." That's pretty much where we're going, right?
Crazy.
Yana, I thought if you thought that us Americans, the Silicon Valley couldn't get any more insufferable, we got a challenge for you. On January 30th, of course, Lord Musk and his merry friends at SpaceX filed an application for launching a 1 million satellite mega constellation. What we didn't know at the time was that Musk, would be launching up AI satellites that extended solar panels nearly 70% longer than that of the ISS at 600 feet. That is needed because these panels would be needed to generate 100 kilowatts of power. Also an assumption that this would only be the start of a much larger satellite series of satellite data centers, not just in quantity, but in size. PC Magazine reached out to Professor Hugh Lewis at University of Birmingham, who calculated that if Musk's plan was to indeed have 1 million of these giant ISS things orbiting, they need to perform a staggering 272 million collision avoidance maneuvers a year. Yana, the future is literally bright.
That's very bright. And it's lacking a lot of regulations of the space activities still. Like we've been discussing this a million times in this podcast. Some other people are talking about it all the time. But the problem is we're not getting with any space regulations anywhere. Even the European Union is currently working on the Space Act, which has some provisions which specifically indicating that we need to consider potential radio and light pollution, exactly what you're talking about. But this future law has been pushed by everyone saying that's going to restrict space activities and stuff. But what about indeed the future collisions which would be created? Isn't that what's going to limit the space activities? No? Yeah, I don't know. I don't have anything to say. That's just ridiculous because the problem is when we granting there's authorization and licensing of the space activities. The problem not always the file goes separately. So, for example, they send 100 satellites, right? And they get authorized and licensed, and then they send another 100 and another 100. All these files are not treated together. So basically, we're not considering the potential cumulative, joint effects of all the space activities. And this is also one of the biggest regulatory gap in there. How we can help that? We need the new laws. They're not going to happen. So what are the alternatives? Maybe Barrington can talk about the technical side. I don't know if you can come up with something, but I wonder if there's any programming which can be involved from Earth how we can make it work better. I don't know.
I think I take a more fatalistic view of it, I suppose. There's a sort of helpless inevitability to it, I suppose. And, you can regulate or license your way to protection of the night sky, but ultimately it will be eroded inevitably. I think, if you think about the fact that space as an environment is on the cusp of being industrialized, it is a frontier of industrialization in the future. It's only a matter of time. So yes, can we mandate properties of reflectivity or limits to solar array size? Yes, you can. But let's be honest, in 50 years, in 100 years from now, space will be full to the gills, orders of magnitude more than today. So it is a losing battle, I think. However, I suppose you could say on the other side, as access to space becomes cheaper, as it industrializes, so does the cost base for, say, space-based telescopes also goes down. So yes, I might have 100 times more satellites, but if it's 1,000 times cheaper for me to launch space telescopes, in a curious sort of way, problem solved, But yeah, I take this fatalistic view because it's going to happen. Like with our natural environment, so space will eventually be polluted as well. As an astronomer, it's painful, but what to do?
Yeah, well, I think you're going to have to move those space-based satellites further away from low Earth orbit.
Will be on the run forever.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, predictions, especially about the future, are always unreliable. So I don't know what will happen. But I do wonder if all these collision avoidance maneuvers, one of them doesn't quite work right, and there will be some accidents up there, and the near-Earth environment there's already quite a lot of space junk up there. There'll be problems, I think. If there are problems, obviously for ground-based astronomy now, but for the whole industry, when they start crashing into each other, which leads others to crash into each other, so you can imagine it might not be so smooth running in the future. That's why.
Perhaps in 100 years we've lost access to low Earth orbit completely through this runaway cascade.
Oh, or any orbit. It might be full of bloody bits smashed up. We're stuck on Earth.
Could be.
Yeah.
In light of this, I think it can be very interesting to actually, there is no requirement for that, but it's really interesting to have this dialogue between these big space actors. How do they feel about that?
There's another constellation that's going to be going up called Project Sunrise, which is a little, to me, terrifyingly named. Amazon's Blue Origin is going to launch 51,600 satellites up. But, hey, you go big or go home, right? So that's what StarCloud, an independent private venture that's trying to do data centers in space, will say, hey, you know what? Yeah, we'll match that 51,000. We'll raise you 33 or 30,000. They're going to go, or whatever it is, go up to 88,000 data center satellites. That's their plan to do that. So yeah, Barrington is going to be a crowded place. If you have one bowling ball that comes through, though, it might become the story may change very quickly.
Oh yeah.
Since we're here talking about Starlink, we now have two things I've never actually asked for in my life. And that was off the grid internet, because quite frankly, it's so very nice to be off the grid. And then of course we have inescapable light pollution. SpaceX has accomplished the unwishable, increasing its number of orbiting internet routers to 10,000 in March. But don't worry, Gwen Shotwell, the SpaceX president, believes that the max number of Starlinks will not exceed 20,000. We're talking in thousands now. It used to be we're talking in, single thousands, hundreds, but we're talking in tens of thousands for every constellation. We'll see how sustainable this is. This may get your popcorn out. You may be enjoying it.
If you look at in the past, like when it was developing, like by Tsiolkovsky or other, like these first space engineers or people were talking about the reality of the space activities, they literally thought, like when they were sending one Sputnik, the first Sputnik ever to orbit, like this was incredible. like now, and we always thought that like universe is endless and like the orbits are endless, but at this point, like they're not that endless, right? So we have to start changing this perception before it's too late, but I think it's too late already, to be honest. Sad enough. I would agree here.
Well, this has been the happiest close to a show I've ever done. Everyone is very optimistic about the future here, and I want to thank you guys for that optimism. Before we go, I want to give my guests one last chance to plug themselves. Yana, where can folks learn more about the Plan B project, everything you're working on? I bet I know that answer, but why don't you tell the folks at home?
Yeah, you know the answer, but I invite everybody to my personal LinkedIn. And you also have LinkedIn of Plan B Project, it's called. So you can have a look, what are we doing? And we also have newsletter of the project where we share some news about light pollution research and noise pollution research. And thank you, guys.
Yeah, it's definitely, you want to follow Yana. She says, as she said in the beginning, you know, why aren't you following her on LinkedIn? It's very, very good LinkedIn person to follow. You get a ton of information, ton of cool stuff going on. Barrington, you have darkskysite.com. Is there anything you want to do a call to action for folks out there, or anything you want to say on that?
It's a new site. It's a baby of mine, and it's a personal project. So I would just love people to come and visit. I would love them to give me feedback. I would love them to get involved. For the more serious astronomers, I would love for them to submit their night sky data, so their sky brightness information, so we can calibrate the map. But otherwise, come visit, play around, see what you think, and just help get the word out. And thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, excellent. Paul?
Well, you should be able to find my stuff on ResearchGate. That's researchgate.net. And I'm Paul Marchant, so look for my publications there on lighting. Some of the early ones were mixed in with stuff I was paid to do for my job, but I've done a bit more since. I think, yeah, that's what I suggest. They're also on the Allen database of research, which you can get at through the Dark Sky International Research page. So you should be able to find your way to it there. Also, if I must do another plug, if you can't, the fully heavy statistical papers, there's some short ones published by Significance. Significance is a sort of Scientific American sort of style publication of the Royal Statistical Society, now jointly with the American Statistical Association and the Australian equivalent is. So there's three, I think they're only about 2 pages long. So if you can find your way to there, you might learn a bit. And I would ask people, just check check everything. Check that it's right.
Great. Well, thank you guys. I want to thank my guests one more time, Barrington Russell, Paul Marchant. I want to keep saying that in a French tone. I don't know why. And Yana Yakushina. Thank you guys for spending your time with me today. I want to also thank our social media volunteers, Emily Byers and Laura Taylor. This episode of Light Pollution News was recorded on April 26, 2026. I'm your host, Bill McGinney, reminding you to only shine the light where it's needed.